What do you do with a ship you cannot shoot and cannot afford to let pass? The motor tanker, Winya. 300,000 tons of Iranian fuel oil. A crew that refused every radio call, and a flag that changed twice before the helicopters had crossed the water. Put a warhead through her hull, and the Gulf of Oman burns for a week. Wave her through, and you have just shown the disguise holds, and left the lane open for 24 ships running the same play behind her. She was built to be untouchable. For most of July she was. Then the answer came, and it was not a smarter weapon or a more persistent radio call. It was a flight of UH-1Y Venoms off the deck of USS Boxer, AH-1Z Viper gunships above them, crossing open water toward a tanker still pushing full speed. Marines went down the ropes. A few minutes later, the ship, her oil, her crew, and her papers belonged to them. Not destroyed, taken. But none of that was possible until the boarding force cleared a problem that had nothing to do with ropes or helicopters. They could not prove whose ship she was. She had been cycling broadcast names mid-chase and ran up a fresh flag as the rotors were already overhead. A floating identity that changed faces every few hours. The disguise meant to protect her had made it impossible to call her Iranian from a distance, and under maritime law that mattered. The only resolution was to put a man on her deck and read her papers himself. The crew knew that. A ship too full to shoot, too valuable to pass, and too slippery to name from a distance should have made it through. She did not, and the reason starts with the one thing her designers never thought to defend against. By mid-July, after a spring and early summer of escalating tension, the United States had a full naval blockade across the Strait of Hormuz, in force since the 14th. Iran was cut off from the legal oil market. For Central Command, that turned enforcement into something harder than stopping ships, because not every ship called for the same response, and the wrong call on one could be exactly wrong for the next. A country under sanctions does not move its oil with warships. It moves it with cover stories. That is the shadow fleet, merchant vessels that look legitimate on paper but are run to disappear from the tracking systems the West relies on. Around 24 Iran-linked tankers were working the waters near Hormuz, and most of them were empty. Decoys pushed through the strait to absorb surveillance so nobody could tell which haul actually mattered. Winya was the one that mattered. Hold the problem the way Central Command held it, because every familiar answer was already off the table. Shooting her was out. A few days earlier, the Navy had put a hellfire into the shadow tanker Belma and killed her engines cleanly, because an empty hull has nothing to lose. But Winya carried 300,000 tons of fuel oil. Drive a warhead into that and you do not seize anything. You get an environmental disaster, a burning crew, and the destruction of the cargo you were trying to keep from Tehran. Her cargo was her protection, and she could not be waved through either. Every run by a ship that size means 2 million barrels delivered, tens of millions of dollars into the Revolutionary Guard's accounts. Letting her go would confirm the disguise works and open the lane for everyone behind her. Hailing her on the radio was pointless. She was not answering, and a fully loaded supertanker does not reverse course because a warship told her to. Cross off the missile. Cross off letting her pass. Cross off the radio. One option remains, and it is not elegant. Put people on her deck, because nothing else works. From here, this is a Marine story, and it starts with a problem they had to solve before anyone could touch her. Nobody knew for certain whose ship she was. Under maritime law, a vessel flying a national flag is treated as a floating piece of that nation's territory. Fire on a ship flying San Marino's colors, and you may have handed a third country a reason for a diplomatic incident. So before anyone boards, one question has to be answered. Whose is this? And Winya was designed so that nobody could pin it down. On the run, she kept cycling her broadcast identity. First Lanjing, then Ajin again. She flew the flag of San Marino, a landlocked country with no coastline. A tell so obvious it read almost as an insult. She spoofed her position. This was not really a ship. It was a floating identity swapping masks every few hours. And here the disguise worked against itself. Because nobody could say with certainty whose ship she was, the Navy could not simply declare her Iranian and act on it. Central Command had to treat this as a flag verification boarding, which meant the only resolution was to put a Marine on that deck and read her papers firsthand. Iran's own camouflage handed the whole problem to the boarding force. Then came the last move. As the helicopters closed in, the crew hauled down the San Marino flag and raised the flag of the Islamic Republic of Iran. A final gamble. I am Iranian territory now. Touch me, and it is a state-on-state incident. At the exact moment the mask came off, and the ship announced who she was, the Marines were already above her. The disguise had bought her everything right up until it did not. So the method chose itself. Board her. The trouble is that boarding a supertanker at full speed is its own difficult problem. And it happened the United States had a force right there, built for exactly this. This was never a job for a Coast Guard cutter. The water was thick with threats, anti-ship missiles, one-way attack drones, and the Revolutionary Guard's fast attack boats working nearby. The mission went to the Boxer Amphibious Ready Group and the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit, a Marine air-ground task force that is self-contained, carries the firepower of a small brigade, and floats on station ready to go. At its center sits USS Boxer, a Wasp-class amphibious assault ship, a warship the scale of a small carrier with a full-length flight deck above and a floodable well deck at the stern. She is what lets this force operate on its own, an airfield, a barracks, and a command post in one hull. When Winya was selected for boarding, the whole plan was built around Boxer. The helicopters would launch from her and return to her. The Marines who stepped onto Winya came from Battalion Landing Team 35, the ground element of the MEU. Their specialty is VBSS, visit, board, search, and seizure. They drill it constantly. Live fire on a pitching deck, close quarters work in the dark, rope descents, the full practice of taking a vessel from the people running it. Carrying them were the Yankee Venoms of Marine Medium Tiltrotor 163 Reinforced, the utility helicopter built to put a squad exactly where it needs to be, with Viper gunships riding escort. None of this was assembled on the day. Every aircraft and every rifle belonged to one self-contained task force trained specifically for this. So how do you actually get onto her? Not up the side. Climbing a supertanker from a boat is a losing proposition. A grapple against a sheer steel wall that can stand 90 feet above the waterline, a crew above with the option to cut the line or turn a fire hose on your head, and every second of the climb spent slow and exposed with surprise already gone. The sides are the one direction she can defend. So they came from the direction she could not. Straight down out of the sky. That is vertical envelopment. Skip the sides, drop onto the top. The same high steel wall that makes her unclimbable gives you a 1,000-foot flat main deck to land on. The Venoms lifted off Boxer's flight deck, crossed the open water, and hovered over the tanker's deck and bridge, while Boxer stayed over the horizon running the operation. The Marines went down the ropes onto a ship still making full speed. Fast roping, the standard method, roughly 30 seconds from rope to boots on steel. She could do nothing about it. A loaded supertanker needs better than a nautical mile just to change heading. It cannot dodge a helicopter. To the men above her, she was effectively standing still. The Vipers held up top the entire time, guns ready for any shoulder-fired threat the guard might have nearby. From the first sound of rotors to the first boot on deck was a handful of seconds. The crew barely registered what was happening before there were armed men on the steel. Physically, the hard part was over. Except getting aboard was never the dangerous part. That was the minute after. They were now armed Marines, standing on a ship full of fuel, with a crew somewhere below who could still try to destroy her, and that is where the job actually started. Boots on the steel. Here is what the Marines could not see. A supertanker's main deck runs close to 1,000 feet. A long field of pipework, tank hatches, and blind corners, with the superstructure and engine plant buried deep at the stern. And somewhere in it, or below it, is a crew whose intentions nobody knows. Unarmed merchant sailors ready to surrender, a security detail behind a hatch, someone already heading for the bridge, or climbing down into the hull. The force that dropped from the sky knows the ship's layout from a diagram. It does not know what is moving inside her right now. Every closed door is a question, and the answers are being worked out in real time by people the Marines have not yet seen. That uncertainty is why they do not try to hold the whole ship. They push for 2 points and nothing else. One team goes for the bridge because whoever controls it controls where 300,000 tons ends up. Until it is secured, she can still head for Iranian waters. But the second target is the one that puts a clock on everything. Deep in the hull is the engine room, and with it the Kingston valves, the sea valves that open below the waterline. A crew that has decided to scuttle rather than surrender only needs to reach those valves and open them, and the whole ship, cargo, papers and all, starts toward the floor of the Gulf of Oman. Scuttling is one of the oldest plays at sea, and the Marines working through the upper decks have no way of knowing whether someone is already down there at a valve while they clear passageways one blind corner at a time. So the whole operation runs without complete information. Both teams push inward simultaneously, toward the bridge and toward the engine spaces, through a ship whose layout they have studied and whose crew they have never met. Every closed hatch a spot where someone could be waiting. This is why speed is the whole point, not for effect, but because every second they are still moving through the ship is a second a hand might be reaching for a valve somewhere below. Secure the engine room, and the ship cannot be scuttled from within. Secure the bridge, and gather the crew, and she stops being a problem. What is left is what they came for. The ship, her cargo, and her people. All in one piece and all in American hands. That is the whole difference from Belma. A hull you can interrogate is worth more than one sitting on the bottom. Only now could the question the whole operation started with be answered. Whose ship is this? The Marines pulled the registration papers and held them against the chain of broadcast names and the flag that had just gone up the mast. They did not match, and the mismatch was the answer. An Iranian vessel in borrowed paperwork. Then, one more thing to confirm. The reason this hull was worth boarding out of 24 that looked almost identical. Was she carrying or was she a decoy? They checked the tanks. Full. 300,000 tons of Iranian fuel oil. A real node in the network. And now there was a Marine standing on her deck who could say so. That is why she was taken alive rather than put down. A ship on the seafloor tells you nothing. A captured one opens her logs, her communications with the management office in Dubai that ran her manifest, and the paper trail of ship-to-ship transfers. Every page a thread back into the network. Stopping this cargo was never really the point. Getting the ship to give up the others was. Give the Shadow Fleet credit where it is due. This is a well-built system. Spoofed signals, flag cycling, decoy hulls. It had beaten the first blockade, slipping dozens of ships through the ring. It was put together by people who understood precisely the vulnerabilities of the force sent to watch them. But every one of those defenses, the smeared identity, the sheer size, the full tanks, was built to defeat the attack the ship expected. A missile, or a satellite watching from far off. She had no answer for a squad standing on her own deck reading her papers. That is really the whole story. America did not go for a bigger weapon. It stopped playing the game the ship was designed to win and switched to one she was never built to survive, a boarding and a search. You can see the same thinking across July 16th as a whole. The blockade handled 3 ships that day, and each one differently. Winya boarded and kept because she was worth too much to destroy. Belma, empty, put down. 3 others turned back over the radio without anyone laying a hand on them. The right tool for the ship in front of it, which is what a working enforcement operation looks like. Taking Winya settled nothing larger. She is one link and the network behind her is still operating, but it showed the link could be reached, boarded, and read, which brings us back to where this started. USS Boxer and the Marines did not overcome Winya with superior firepower. They changed the angle of attack. Every easy answer had been ruled out. She was too full to shoot, too valuable to pass, and too slippery to name from a distance, and that left one path. Work out who she was. Come down from above, take the bridge and the engine room before her crew could sink her, and read her rather than wreck her. Everything that protected her from a missile left her open to men dropping out of the sky. It was never about a heavier weapon. It was about coming at the ship from the one direction she was not designed to handle. And here is what the whole operation quietly rested on. None of it was possible until someone had already found her, had pulled this one hull out of 24 that looked nearly identical, half of them empty, and running as decoys to burn exactly that effort. The boarding was the easier half. The hard half is finding a ship that spends every hour trying not to be found. That is completely different work. No boots or ropes, just sensors and patience, and a watch wide enough to catch something that does not want to be seen.